All right, fantastic. We are now live on YouTube. Thank you guys for joining in. We'll also be recording this call just in case something goes wrong. Again, I'd like to thank all the participants for joining in today's event today, hosted by Mewell. This event is about toxic masculinity, we'll be again recording this live on YouTube, so you can watch afterwards. If you have any questions at any point in time, please use the chat on Zoom to ask your questions. And otherwise, we'll be bringing in questions during the question and answer period of the call, which would be after Dr. Sharma gives his presentation, which would be around 20-25 minutes. And otherwise, I'll hand this over to Akanksha, who knows Dr. Sharma, and she'll provide a brief introduction for us.
Thank you, Eric. So Dr. Satan Sharma, I have known him for as long as I can remember. But more than that, I think I have known him and his father as being very renowned and proficient psychiatrists. Him particularly, he was trained at a prestigious college called Armed Forces Medical College in India. And after that, he has chosen to specialize in psychiatry because I have found him to be very curious about the human mind. And right now, over the past few years, I think I've seen him progress into a public speaker, a trainer, a coach of sorts. So his impact is seeing a very wider outreach in that sense. Other than that, what I've known him as, he's an long distance runner. I think he ran the London Marathon in 2016, if I remember right. And as I have known him, as he is interested in everything, like you can talk to him about everything, and he always has things to say which are very interesting, very insightful. And I deeply am hopeful, and I'm in a way confident as well that you will all be able to take away something useful, something insightful from this session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Akanksha. That was a very, very flattering introduction, which sets me up to now, to force me to be interesting and insightful. I hope I am that. Well, as you very rightly said, I chose to specialize in psychiatry because, I like to know about things, and I think the most complex, object in the entire known universe is the human mind, right? So, what could be more interesting than having intellectual knowledge of how the human mind works? Because, whatever we are today, wherever we have reached, it has all happened because of this wonderful little organ known as the human brain. And the mind is probably somewhere inside that brain, right? We still don't really know what the mind is. We all have working models, we all have our theories, we have all beautiful conjecture about how and where the human mind resides. But many times when I'm talking to people about psychology and behavioral sciences, I many times ask them with this one simple question: how would you define psychology? What is psychology? And most people do say, well, it is the study of the human mind. And I tell them, well, unfortunately, none of us can see or observe the human mind. So that means the entire discipline goes into area called as pseudoscience. If you can't really see something, and it's probably in the realm of something like astrology, right? But then once we are able to in the right way, psychology would be an observation of human and animal behavior. And behavior we can see, right? We can see traits, we can see patterns. Even if the science is not exact, it does, in a way, like we try to predict weather, it can give us informed ways of trying to predict the outcomes of certain human behaviors in certain predictable situations. You know, all of that will happen over time and how things have evolved. So today, I had a choice of either going in for a PowerPoint presentation or a little talk, and I have what I have seen. What works better with me is a little storytelling. One loses people in PowerPoint, and I'm sure that in boardrooms across the world, in classrooms everywhere, death by PowerPoint is a very real thing. It does, put people off to sleep if it doesn't kill them. So I'll try to uh, um, try to create a story as to how we got here into this topic of today, which is I'm very thankful that you have given me such an interesting topic, and it's been great to get in touch with young, wonderful minds like yours. And I would really appreciate if you can just pop up those questions, type in those questions. Eric Burns, being today's moderator and the host of this entire meeting, will be bringing those questions to me. And let's try to keep this as conversational as you know as easily approachable as possible, right? So today's topic, when we talk about toxic masculinity or fragile masculinity, what do we really mean by that? If we were to go into the definition of this particular phenomenon, it would represent a rather narrow and a repressive description of manhood, you know, which would designate manhood as defined by violence, by sex, by sexual status, and with aggression. It's a cultural ideal of manliness in certain cultures, the way things have developed, where strength is everything, where emotions are seen as a sign of weakness, where sex and brutality are the yardsticks by which men are measured, and while supposedly feminine traits, which can range from emotional vulnerability to simply not being hypersexual, can be seen that the manliness has been taken away, right? So that is how we understand the current phenomenon of toxic masculinity. And when we say toxic and when we say fragile, they're actually the same coin being looked at from two different sides, right? How did we get here? How did this aggressive alpha male come to recognize or come to represent what is desirable or wanted in a man? Well, let's go back to our ancestors then. The human race having developed over the past few thousands of years, the past few thousands of years are probably just a blink in the greater scheme of things, just a blink of an eye in the greater scheme of things of evolution. But in these past few thousands of years, human beings have gone from being hunter gatherers to being agriculture based to being industry based to now being what is called as a concept based society, right? We have come through a lot of massive change, and most of that change has occurred in the past 200 years, right? And the brain, well, unfortunately, just like our diet, our brain has also not evolved as quickly as the world around us has evolved. If we were to look around and see how natural we are, well, I have news for you. We are already living in extremely, completely unnatural worlds. Yeah. We are nowhere close to that environment which we were made to fit into. I can take a very small example of just the artificial light which we are using. Just by using artificial light at night time, we have reinvented the sun. We have, in effect, completely changed what was a natural order of a day followed by a night and then a day again to a continuous daytime. And if we try to look at it, how much stress just this one little change would bring onto our brains and our mind and our circadian cycles, well, I would say it is already a mind-boggling enough event by itself. And then when we add 24 hours availability, multiple screens and everything which is vying for our attention, a normal human being these days will be bombarded with at least 4 to 5 thousand advertisements during the course of a single day. You know, different ways in which these messages would be relayed to us. And well, our primitive brain is actually not really made or created to handle this much of information. You know, we are in the end, the paleo part of the brain, which is the center for aggression, is part of the reptilian brain, the limbic cortex. That part is usually in the amygdala and the hypothalamus of the brain, right? And that part served us very well when we were hunters and gatherers. There would be time when suddenly this one human being who was living in a natural world and exposed to all the fury and all the elements of nature might need to get into a fight or flight mode immediately at the drop of a hat because, well, a Siberian tiger has seen you, right? Or because probably there is a hunt which is afoot, and you need to work towards getting that hunt, getting that kill, so that you can, you know, get food for that, right? Over the course of these past 200 to 300 years, what we did is that we discovered this thing called as agriculture. And many a times people say that, well, man domesticated wheat and these crops. Well, it was the other way around. What happened was that agriculture domesticated the human animal. The human animal now was dependent on a particular patch of land which would yield him grain at predictable intervals of time, and he became landlocked. And then something immensely important happened about 200 years ago when we discovered this very rich hydrocarbon source called as coal. And then we started running our industries on that. You know, coal became a immediate catalyst as an amplifier for the human growth. Suddenly all those things which were not possible suddenly became possible because we were so energy rich. We suddenly learned that we could very easily burn up these things, produce massive amounts of energy, and then create more and more complex machinery to what has happened now, increase the speed and pace of life, right? So during that time, as the human animal became more and more domesticated, and we went through all these rapid advances in human cycle, we were able to go through certain massive areas of aggression also. We saw two world wars happening. We saw more than 14,600 wars in the entire course of recorded human history during these past 300 plus years. Now, all of that is matter of record. And then over time, slowly we realize that these wars and other things really do not create so much of, you know, goodness for everybody. And that peace is something which we need to probably work on. So most of the civilized society shifted towards a more family oriented, a more growth-oriented kind of a lifestyle and tried to hide the inner reptilian cycle which we had of aggression and of the human animal being trying to be the hunter. So what happened over time? Although our externally societies settle down into what can be called as uh, uh, more or less domesticated routine, the male animal could not and has not yet been able to let go of that particular strength or that particular quality of his which served him well as a hunter and as a gatherer, right? So what happens because of that particular uh, you know uh, very male trait which men of the species have to go through. And currently what happens is that because of that particular developmental delay, men continue to suffer pain in silence. You know, they are encouraged to show no need. They are encouraged to never lose. They are encouraged to show no emotion other than bravado or rage. They are shown to be self-sufficient, to be the providers. They don't depend on anyone. you know Also, they don't do anything that can be construed or misconstrued as a weakness. Now that happens to be a desirable, socially warranted, I would say, program, which has not evolved at the same rate as at the rate in which our living conditions have evolved. Yeah. So the other desirable masculine traits of providing or of sportsmanship and of resourcefulness are not used to the extent to which they can be used. There are also certain feminine traits like nurturing, sustainability, balance, taking care of community, which would have been nurtured, but somehow, because of our cultures not catching up to the current demands of the times, we cannot do that. So what problems does it create in the modern man or the modern male? What problems does this toxic or fragile masculinity cause? Well, there are very obvious problems of poor mental health and even poorer coping mechanisms amongst men. you know Now the poor mental health is one thing which we have seen over time. Now, of course, toxic masculinity hurts women, and that would be a given. One would very easily be able to see that patriarchy infringes upon women's rights, that the entire feminist movement, the women's suffrage movement, all came about because of women demanding that they be given equal rights to men. And yes, they do deserve that. And it is thanks to the feminist movement that we have actually now also realized that the men have also been suffering because of patriarchy, because of this way of fake bluster, winning at any cost, the strong, silent archetype which the human male was being encouraged to create, or probably they they took it upon themselves that this is what our role is. So this particular idea of fakeness which needs to be projected as a man, and which is reinforced by popular culture, of staying positive, even while things are not so well on the inside, they go unacknowledged until they reach a point of coping failure. And then how does the modern man cope? How do they try to take care of this fragile ego defense, which now the world is asking of them, and which they are not allowed to say. They feel it, but they can't say it. So what do these men do? Well, They fall into the, again, maladaptive, immature coping mechanisms of using drugs, of using alcohol, which are now also by the culture and the way in which our patriarchy has created it, are seen a manly way of roughing it out. Well, this is how men do it, right? So that particular way in which our men have been forced, in which they have been, you know, they have played into this entire gamut of uh, being projected as strong, tough men, has given rise to an entire series of mental health disorders, physical health disorders, increased alcoholism, increased drug abuse, increased risk-taking, behavior, increase in suicides, increased depression. And since men tend to use more violent methods when they're dealing with a death wish or with a suicidal idea, therefore men also suffer from increased death by suicide. And it has been seen in the past couple of decades that death by suicide is now emerging as the leading cause of death amongst the youth, amongst the young. Toxic masculinity, many a times, because it is seen as a desirable trait, is also copied by women, right? And that creates another slew of problem where women think that probably smoking and drinking and asserting sexually promiscuous behavior, or or creating the same kind of a risk-taking behavior as men are doing, is a sign of equality. That again creates a way of toxic femininity, which we can probably take on some other day. But right now, the toxic male behavior becomes a model for women also to follow, and that creates a lot of problems for lots of people, right? So I think that was what I wanted to talk about in terms of the evolutionary biology and in terms of the way it has landed us to where it has landed us. That was my short talk on this particular topic. And maybe I would now like to ask Eric if there can be some particular areas in which we can talk further on this.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Sharma, so much for your very nice presentation, talk about toxic masculinity. I really enjoyed the birth of toxic masculinity, the argument that you brought up about how the birth of agriculture actually made toxic masculinity redundant and, well, obsolete. I guess to add on to this, I have a couple of my own questions, if it's okay for you, Dr. Sharma. And this actually kind of goes back a little bit to the idea of how you were talking about how toxic masculinity comes from our primitive brain before agriculture. But one subject that you briefly mentioned but didn't talk about too much is the role of culture and reinforcing a toxic masculinity. And I wonder if you can explore this further, and particularly, is it true that, say, all of this nature of toxic masculinity has its root in ancient society, in ancient human populations, or is it actually that, say, the birth of toxic masculinity comes more from culture?
Yeah, so that's a very valid question. Yes, Eric, and you're right that I can expand on this particular idea about how culture reinforces this particular idea of how a man should be, right? So our when we are born, probably a baby is uh, well is not having any preconceived notions about how it is supposed to behave as a man or as a woman. But as the baby grows, they are taught that they have a particular, at the age of 2 to 3, they are able to find out and they are able to assert that they have an identity, right? They are boys or they are little girls. And then as culture and as they see around them the models of men and women, and they see also a model of how to behave. So culture, of course, is one which shapes the behavior, the beliefs, and the way in which a particular human being will grow up, their thought patterns, their worldview. And yes, so culture is actually the real one thing which will create the sort of behavior which we see. You know, there are several tribes among anthropological studies which have shown that those tribes simply do not have ever had the certain crimes which occur in what we call civilized worlds, right? So certain tribes which do not have any rape to speak of, which do not have any murders to speak of, right? And why has that happened? Well, because they have learned to stay at a certain level of harmony with each other. They have evolved better ways of expressing disagreement, of working out aggression, you know. And that's why we see that there are certain cultures which have more of toxic masculinity, and there are certain cultures which have more of celebration of femininity and celebration of of the human way of life. So yeah, culture definitely is responsible.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you also briefly mentioned, touched upon femininity, and I guess transitioning a bit to say, women. Would you have any suggestions on how women can help men overcome fragile masculinity? What is what and potentially also people in our audience, what can they do to help make things better?
Right. Right. So there are certain I would like to actually um put about 3 or 4 points in which we can actually practically on a day-to-day basis uh, contribute in taking care of, or reducing the overall quantum of masculine reorientation, I would say, which can happen. So one can, what has been seen in a number of studies is that most men consistently overestimate the sexism of other men. Yeah. So that is a set belief wherein men would consistently overestimate that other men are more sexist and then put it upon themselves to follow that particular example. So we need to start reorienting this baseline belief. Wherever we see it, we need to challenge it. We need to say, no, well, when we see or hear things like, well, all men are the same, or well, that's how men are. Boys will be boys. There needs to be a voice of reason which challenges it, which says, no, it is not like that. You know, they are, most of the human beings are actually good human beings, and they are simply doing this because of a social proof, a need to fit in, a need to look masculine, and that particular thing is causing it. So once we are able to challenge it, once we are able to see it, once we are to call it out whenever we see it, I think that goes a long way in reducing the casual sexism, in reducing this idea that there's most men are, overly sexist, right? And besides that, when we talk about the activities, in terms of the compensation activities which men do, which are uh, too demarcated with too strong a box, it's like that this is what men do, this is what women do. I think those need to be pushed a little bit by the modern man, more than the modern woman. I think modern men need to start exploring their roles and relationship horizons. They need to expand outside these rigid walls which patriarchy puts in for them. you know Men can be providers, men can be seen to be doing childcare, men can definitely handle shopping lists. Men can do things around the house which traditionally would not put them into that much of a male role. Men can cook, of course they can. They can take care of the kids. They don't always throw up their hands if there's a child crying. No, we need more and more men to take up these roles of expanding the relationship horizon, right? So these, I think, will go a long way. And we need women to recognize it. When they do see it, they need to reinforce this. They need to recognize it. They need to see it in the positive light that it is. It requires everyone to grow up to the extent where we are able to see that that these are desirable, overall helpful traits, and more and more men need to shift to the omega man than the 1960s alpha men, which we were probably brought up as thinking is the role of masculinity. Yeah.
Thank you for your response. And I guess so. My understanding is that the first step that we need to do, both audience and I guess for men in general, is to recognize that there is a problem and then try to address where we see that we're being out of line with modern expectations.
Right.
So I do actually have a very interesting question from YouTube that I'd like to pose to you, Dr. Sharma. So we have Vlad Niculescu has a question. He says that Freud used to say that there's one factor which gives one's life purpose, and that is the feeling of importance. And the question he has is, are people actually really falling into drugs because they want to feel more masculine? Or is it just simply an easier way to gain the feeling of importance?
Okay. Right. So thank you for the question. That's a very interesting question, and there are two parts to it. The first part, which I understand, is that do people take drugs to become important? And then the other part was, do people take drugs to explore the meaning of life? Is that how this question is? Have I understood it correctly?
I think it's more that it's do people take drugs and alcohol? Earlier it seemed as if you're giving one of your examples in which people fall into drugs and alcohol abuse because of toxic masculinity. But I think in this case he's saying that according to Freud, potentially people are falling into drug and alcohol abuse because of importance, because either they have a lack of importance, I guess, or they need to gain some feeling of something larger than themselves, I suppose. So is toxic masculinity the main point here, or is the need to have importance something that should also be addressed?
Right. So what he is actually saying would be giving strength to my original point, that in the end it is a way of fitting into the old boys club. That because other people are also using alcohol and drugs, and well, they are looked upon as heroes. As we have had archetypal images of the Marlboro man, right? A man with a cigarette was considered the height of masculinity. With Marlboro, that was much before we actually discovered that, well, these things are actually causing cancer, then people are dying because of it, and governments came down hard upon them, and we actually stopped advertising tobacco and alcohol in that manner. Well, these used to be the go-to places for feeling like a man. You would have a bigger circle of friends. You would be recognized if you had your drinking buddies and your smoking buddies, right? And that is what, again, is another way of entering the man's world, for, as you have mentioned it, in a way of gaining importance, in the way of gaining your identity as a man. So yes, I mean, if you want to feel important, according to the Freudian concept of the ego having to identify, well, yes, this would again reinforce that particular belief again because of masculinity. A man's world, which is run on drugs and smoking and the old boys network, where all of us can slap each other on the back and feel like real men. You know, that particular thing or that particular identity comes in through again the toxic masculinity and it gels pretty much with the same idea of the Freudian identity, which you have rightly pointed out. So yes, they are not opposite to each other. They are in fact different angles to the same particular behavior, right?
I yeah, I certainly appreciated your response. It makes sense. Maybe Vlad will respond later with another question. We'll see. But a bit also on um, let's see. Sorry, I need to get organized. A second question that we have for you is, so how can men? So of course, earlier you talked about how women and people in our audience can help to address the problem of toxic masculinity. But I guess the first step, as you said, is to recognize the problem. But how can men recognize problems within ourselves, and what would be the right way to address these?
Right. So men need to, well, we are at that stage, Eric, where I would say that we don't need a revolution. You know, we need evolution. We need people to come to more better terms with themselves and try to understand what they are at a slightly deeper level. Unfortunately, the world which we live in is the 15 minutes of fame world, wherein where we are not encouraging deep thought, where we are not really allowing people to look at the important things because well we are too busy with the urgent things that demand our attention. Our social media accounts, our 24/7 300 channels which are coming in, our Netflix and our direct to home uh, delivery of non-stop entertainment, the number of video games which we have, the number of apps which we can download. Having or being bored is no longer an option. We are constantly distracted. Okay, so this distraction, what it does is that it is the enemy of deep thought. We are not able to actually think about things. We are reacting to too many things at the same time. We find ourselves distracted most of the time. We just find ourselves responding, and many a times all these responses are geared to appeal to our primitive brain, right? And that primitive brain is aggressive. That primitive brain is thrill seeking. That primitive brain needs excitement on the go. So all what advertisement has done and what modern media has done is it has found those particular clickbaits. It has found those trigger points. It has found those buttons, and they know how to push them. So what we need to do is probably all of us need to disconnect at times. At times we need to start thinking about what is important in life. At times we need to start paying more attention to what needs to happen in the greater scheme of things, and how we are not becoming, the free will is becoming less and less of a commodity these days. The illusion of free will is what we have at the cost of real free will, which is simply, filling up our times with various gadgets and various distractions. So what we need to do is to recognize these traits. First of all, we need to disconnect. We need to find the time and the space to keep our minds at a level where we can think about the deeper things. We need to start talking to people who have divergent views from us. One of the best things which will challenge patriarchy or which will challenge societal conditioning is talking to those people, having good quality conversations with those people who have very different viewpoints from us. That will help in our own growth, in our own, I would say, recognition of our humanity, and in finding out different facets within us which we did not know that they existed. And as almost everything that has to do with human development, every wisdom or every human concentrated knowledge talks about knowing ourselves better, right? So once we create that space, once we are able to create a certain amount of time, once we are able to create a certain mindset that yes, I need to know more about the way I'm responding and not reacting. I think that will be the first step towards changing these deep-rooted traits which society and conditioning has put upon us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And we actually have quite a few more questions, and our audience actually has been a bit active. But really quickly before we get into some of the audience questions, I do want to address one of the comments you made earlier, in which something that I thought was really interesting, where you said that most men consistently overestimate the sexism of other men. This was a very particular, interesting phrase for me, because it almost seemed to, I don't want to get too off topic, but it almost seemed to imply that society has a tendency to become more extreme because we
Yeah.
don't know. So one, is that true? And then second, what can we do about it? Is it just these voices in the room that recognize the problem and then tell people that it's too much? Is that the only thing keeping society and masculinity from going too extreme?
It is one of the factors, Eric. So when I mentioned this, it is part of a study which came to light, and it is when done over various groups of men, consisted of 100 men each. And this particular experiment was done where it was found that yes, actually, most men do consistently overestimate the sexism of other men and mold their own opinion in accordingly, right? So whenever those men were given a feedback that no, this is not actually how most men would do, this is not how most men would react, and then it was seen that those particular people to whom this feedback was given, they were able to mold their answers accordingly, right? They were able to change, what we in psychology are always trying to do is change human behavior. So this actually made a change in behavior, right? Apart from as opposed to the control group, which was not given a feedback, right? So it's actually part of an experiment. I can actually share details later on with you about this particular experiment, very interesting one. And it has actually come to us through scientific analysis. It's not
Okay,
just
yeah.
the term, is the way it is.
It,
And what helps is good, honest feedback and a reorientation to these baseline beliefs. We need to stop believing that the world is a bad place. The world is, what we make of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very rewarding to hear that a simple recognition or simple feedback actually does make such a big difference in people's behaviors and understanding. But yeah, so to move on to some of our audience questions. So one person asks that in relationships, this person oftentimes comes across the phrase, quote, "There has to be an amount of male ego to make it work." His question is it really required to have an ego to be like a man?
Right. Okay. So very interesting, very real question, and yeah, I think when you are mentioning ego, you are mentioning many times the word ego is used loosely. I mean, the way psychologists use ego, and the way it is used in the lay people can be very different, right? So I will take the ego meaning that a sense of importance, a sense of self, a certain positive self-image. If that is how you are using this particular word, ego, well, yes, of course, one needs to feel good about oneself. There has to be healthy self-esteem, and not only for men, for women, every human being deserves that healthy self-esteem, a feeling that you feel good in your own skin, that you feel whole in your own skin, that you feel like a good human being who's helpful, who's resourceful, who feels that they are an asset to the world. So yes, in that particular sense of the word ego, definitely it is required by every human being. I would not say just the male. It is a prerogative of every human being, right?
Yeah,
So let's be a little more charitable towards that particular term. Yes.
yeah. I certainly agree with that as well. And so another audience question that we have is, what in your opinion, Dr. Sharma, what do you think of course we can recognize problems, but perhaps it doesn't fully change how society functions, and particularly in the way in which we raise children. So the question is, what do we need to change about the way where we raise boys, especially when they're always fed statements such as "stop acting like a girl."
Right. So I think whoever has asked the question has answered it for me already. They're already recognizing that yes, boys need not be told that be a boy or stop acting like a girl or boys don't cry. Those particular things uh, are uh, are a relic of a bygone generation. I do believe that the upcoming generation is smarter. They are much more in tune with themselves as human beings. They know that boys are not robots. They also have feelings. Boys also cry, and it is okay to have a cry once in a while. It does not make you less of a man. If anything, it makes you more of a human being. So as we go into this brave new world where we are trying to create a better world for everybody, I think being a human being is what is required. Having a boy or a girl label is not very helpful anymore. I many times I live in India where we do unfortunately see a rather strong societal roles rather set in terms of men have to do this and women have to do that. But whenever I do my parenting sessions, I talk about, well, boys need to now learn how to cook, just in the same way as Indians are now teaching their daughters how to drive. We as human beings have to become more and more self-reliant. We have to become more and more, resourceful in terms of taking care of ourselves. Driving probably can still be replaced by an Uber or an Ola, or any of these ride sharing apps which we have. But cooking food is a very basic necessity, and many times I tell them, would you like your little poor boy to be at the mercy of a girl because he can't cook? Right? So one needs to probably change the perspective a little bit, and not make it as much of a role of a boy or a role of a girl to do certain things. I think we should raise them as. I think we are already overcoming those stigmas where girls used to be not good at maths and boys used to be better at maths. No, I think we are already outgrowing that. And we need to throw cliches at our kids. We need to give them experiences and we need to praise them for anything which makes them more human. We need to encourage them to talk about their feelings. They need to become better emotionally, more emotionally complete, more emotionally balanced human beings who recognize their own emotions and by doing so are able to recognize emotions in others, right? So that is the definition, and that is the way to go
Well, thank you definitely for your
forward in a more emotionally.
thank you definitely for your tips. Um, Kind of on that notion of becoming more in tune and recognizing how to express um, um, yourself and express your emotions. I guess my own personal question is, well, I'm a man. and I recognize that I should be free to express emotions and that I should be able to cry. Yet these emotions don't come naturally to me, and there's something that even though I feel I should be able to, I feel that it's my pride, the way in which I grew up, that prevents me from doing it. Simply recognizing this as a problem hasn't, I don't know, it hasn't made a difference yet. What do I need to do in order to overcome these things?
Well, I think men traditionally don't talk to each other in that way and manner. We are, as Eric, we are victims of a societal construct wherein men don't talk about feelings. you know, Wherein it is seen as unmanly. So I would say that find those few friends which you have, real friends, and learn to talk to them. Many times I've seen that women teach men how to talk feelings better. So I have generally seen that women have a more sobering, more humanizing effect on men. They are able to best help men in terms of overcoming their own uh, mental barriers. So I would say that whenever in a relationship, try to be more expressive if you are in a relationship, and also, if you are a heterosexual man and have men about you who can or who are comfortable in expressing their own emotional states, I think they can be a great sounding board. You can bounce thoughts and ideas off them and create a safe space where it is not unmanly to talk about emotions, about things which all of us grapple with on a day-to-day basis. It's real. You know it's human.
And I guess if no, I don't want to delve too much into speculation here, but if I were again
Right.
to take your previous phrase that most men consistently overestimate the sexism of other men, I
Right.
wonder if you could conversely reverse that statement and also say if you surround yourself with other people that care and other people that share amongst themselves, that we can create a more increasingly more caring society because we overestimate uh, how much we care,
That
and then we'll.
that's Yeah, absolutely. That's the solution which we are working towards. I think that is what we need to be putting our energies into, right? That is the dream, of course.
So then, kind of finally, so now that we're also reaching close to the hour, in which thank you, by the way, we have a really good question which kind of ties up for the main the whole main theme, which is how does toxic masculinity affect men's physical and mental health? So right to the point. um,
Right.
let us know.
And absolutely, that is what we have touched upon earlier also. But yes, I will of course go through this because it is the crux of the entire thing. So like just now, Akansha talked about about the way in which masculinity is projected and created, right? So, what problems it creates is that number one, the poor mental health and coping mechanisms, right? Men, when they are not encouraged to express emotions, they are also not encouraged to talk about sadness, about anything which is perceived to be a negative emotion. And well, we are human beings. It is not possible to be always be positive. It's humanly impossible. Nobody can always be positive. And by not talking about our sadnesses, about our negative emotions, about what are perceived or talked about as negative emotions, we are actually creating another culture of toxic positivity. Toxic positivity. I need all of us to be more cognizant of this term, which is now coming up very strongly. We cannot say just be positive. It's probably the worst thing to say to somebody who's going through clinical depression. It is probably the worst thing to tell somebody who is going through emotional pain, right? Just be positive. Sorry, it's not possible. But it is what is more helpful is, okay, how do you feel? Tell me. And it is okay to not be okay, right? These are the terms which I use in with increasing frequency now, that it's okay to not be okay. It is fine to feel no. It is fine to feel, at times probably that there is no solution to what I am going through. It's okay to share that despondency. It's okay to be vulnerable, you know, and those are what masculinity puts those mental blocks in front of, right? This honest expression of vulnerability, this recognition that yes, not always will you be positive, that there are times when your mental state may go down, and there are times when you may need help, right? So toxic masculinity stands in the way of getting to the right kind of help. It can take you to maladaptive and often harmful ways of dealing with these emotions, going into drug abuse, going into alcohol, going into risk taking behavior. So, that and those particular areas is where we need to break down these barriers and have a more honest conversation with people, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. I certainly have a lot more questions to ask, but I know that the hour is now finished, and so I definitely want to thank you once again, Dr. Sharma. And I suppose if people did have more questions to ask, would there be some way where we can ask these
Yeah.
questions?
I can share my email address, and possibly we can
Well,
definitely take your questions on that, right?
in that case, we'll share it privately. I don't want to share it to our live stream on YouTube. I think that might be something that you wouldn't
Right.
want to have
Or
get.
probably if you have a way of collating these questions, maybe we could answer them on a subsequent session or something like that.
That
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 can
sounds
also be
like
done,
that sounds
right?
like a fantastic suggestion. And for the time being, people can contact us, the MeWell community, at contact at mewell. That's MEWELL. mewellcommunity.ch. And so people can send us questions this way. They can visit our website at mewellcommunity.ch. And hopefully, Dr. Sharma might be able to even do a second special with us sometime later. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. It
Thank
was
you.
a pleasure. And thank you, Akanksha, for introducing such a wonderful speaker for us tonight.
It
All right.
was a pleasure, Eric. It was fun being here. And thank you everyone for attending. And I hope we were able to answer some questions today. And I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Akansha, and thank you, Eric, for
And
arranging
take
this.
care. We'll end the live stream. Yep.